Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So two women were walking home from the bar late one night when they both realized they needed to pee. With no bathrooms in sight, they slipped into a nearby cemetery. One woman used her panties to wipe, while the other grabbed a wreath off a headstone. The next night, their husbands were chatting at the bar. One said, "I think I need to keep a closer eye on my wife. She came home without her panties last night." The other shook his head and said, "That's nothing. Mine came home with a card stuck in her backside that read, 'You were loved and will be missed by the entire fire department.'" So, a boy came home from school looking a bit puzzled. He asked his dad, "Hey Dad, did you go to the same school as me?" His dad smiled and replied, "Yep, I sure did go to the same school, just 35 years earlier." "Why do you ask?" The boy shrugged and said, "Well, Mrs. Johnson told me today that she hasn't seen an idiot like me in 35 years. So the air traffic control tower suddenly lost communication with a small twin-engine aircraft. Moments later, the tower's landline rang. One of the employees answered. It was a passenger from the aircraft, calling from the pilot's mobile phone. He shouted, "Mayday, Mayday." The pilot had a sudden, fatal heart attack. "I grabbed his phone from his pocket," he told me before we took off, that the tower was on speed dial. "I'm at 18,000 feet, going 180 miles an hour, and I'm flying upside down." The tower employee quickly put the call on speaker and said, Okay, stay calm, we've got you. We'll guide you down. Just answer a few questions. First, how do you know you're at 18,000 feet? The man yelled, "It says 18,000 on the altimeter right in front of me." "Good. And how do you know you're going 180 miles per hour? "It says 180 on the airspeed indicator." "Perfect. You're doing great. Now, it's completely overcast outside, so how do you know you're flying upside down?" There was a pause. Then the man shouted, "Because the crap in my pants is running out of my shirt collar." So I was sitting in a bar one day when two rather large women walked in, chatting with a distinctive accent. "Curious," I said. "That's a cool accent. Are you two ladies from Ireland?" One of them snapped, "It's Wales, you idiot!" So I quickly corrected myself. "My apologies. So are you two Wales from Ireland?" So a woman's husband had been slipping in and out of a coma for several months, and she never left his side. Day after day, she sat by his bedside, holding his hand. One day, he opened his eyes and slowly motioned for her to come closer. As she leaned in, he whispered, his eyes filled with emotion, "You know what? You've been with me through everything. When I got fired, you were there. When my business went under, you were there. When I got shot, you stayed by my side. When we lost the house, you stuck with me. When my health started to fail, you never left." Her eyes welled up as she smiled, her heart swelling with love. "What are you trying to say, dear?" He paused, looked into her eyes, and said, "I think you're bad luck." So a guy named Bob receives a free ticket to the Super Bowl from his company. Excited, he heads to the stadium only to discover his seat is in the very last row, way up in the corner. He's closer to the Goodyear blimp than the field. About halfway through the first quarter, Bob notices an empty seat about 10 rows from the field, right on the 50-yard line. He decides to take a chance. He makes his way down through the crowd, slips past security, and sits down. He turns to the man next to him and asks, "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" "No, The man replies. Amazed, Bob says. Wow, this is incredible. Who would have a seat like this at the Super Bowl and not use it? The man replies, actually, it's my seat. I was supposed to come with my wife, but she passed away. This is the first Super Bowl we haven't attended together since we got married in 1967. Bob says, oh man, I'm so sorry. That's heartbreaking. But couldn't you find a relative or friend to take the seat? The man shakes his head and says, no, they're all at the funeral. So Patty and Mick were both laid off, so they went to the unemployment office. When asked about his occupation, Patty replied, I was a knicker stitcher. I sew the elastic onto ladies' knickers and thongs. The clerk looked it up in the system and, seeing it classified as unskilled labor, informed Patty he would receive $80 a week in unemployment benefits. Next, Mick stepped up. When asked his occupation, he said diesel fitter. Since a diesel fitter is classified as skilled labor, the clerk told Mick he'd receive $160 a week. When Patty found out, he was furious. He stormed back into the office and demanded to know why his friend and co-worker was getting twice the pay. The clerk calmly explained, knicker stitchers are unskilled labor. Diesel fitters are skilled labor. Patty shouted, what skill? I sew the elastic on the knickers and thongs. Then Mick puts them over his head and says, yep, diesel fitter. So a kid goes to his dad and asks, Dad, I'm doing my homework and need help answering a question. What's the difference between potentially and realistically? His dad thinks for a moment and says, good question, son. Let's do a little experiment first. Go ask your mother if she'd sleep with a stranger for $1 million. Then ask your sister the same question. Come back and tell me what they say. So the kid goes to the kitchen and asks his mom, Mom, if a stranger came to our door and offered you $1 million to sleep with him, would you do it? She thinks for a second and says, well, for $1 million, sure I would. The kid then goes to his sister's room and asks, Sis, if someone came to our door and offered you $1 million to sleep with him, would you do it? She grins and says, absolutely, no question. The boy returns to his dad and says, Dad, both Mom and Sis said they'd do it. The dad nods and says, all right, son, here's your answer. Potentially, we're sitting on $2 million. Realistically, we're living with 2 slots. So a police officer pulled over a motorist who was speeding down Main Street. But officer, the man started to say, I can explain. Just be quiet, snapped the officer. You're going to cool your heels in jail until the chief gets back. But officer, I just wanted to say, and I said keep quiet. You're going to jail. A few hours later, the officer checked on the prisoner and said, lucky for you, the chief's at his daughter's wedding. He should be in a good mood when he gets back. The man in the cell smiled and said, don't count on it. I'm the groom. So 3 sons left home, made their fortunes, and later got together to talk about the gifts they were able to give their elderly mother. The first said, I built a huge house for our mother. The second said, I sent her a Mercedes with a chauffeur. The third smiled and said, I've got you both beat. You know how Mom loves the Bible, but her eyesight's failing. So I sent her a one-of-a-kind parrot, 12 years of training by church elders. It recites the entire Bible. All she has to do is say the chapter and verse, and the parrot recites it. A few weeks later, their mother sent out thank you letters. "Milton," she wrote, "the house is enormous. I only live in one room, but I have to clean the whole thing. Gerald," she wrote, "I'm too old to travel. I rarely use the Mercedes, and the driver is just plain rude. Dearest Donald," she wrote, "you were the only one with good sense. That chicken was absolutely delicious." So a drunk man who reeked of beer sat down on a subway next to a priest. His tie was stained, his face smeared with red lipstick, and a half-empty bottle of gin peeked out of his torn coat pocket. He opened his newspaper and began reading. After a few minutes, he turned to the priest and asked, "Say, Father, what causes arthritis?" The priest replied, "My son, it's caused by loose living, being with cheap, wicked women, too much alcohol, and contempt for your fellow man." The drunk muttered, "Well, that's something," and went back to his paper. The priest thought about what he said, then nudged the man and apologized. "I'm sorry if I came on too strong. How long have you had arthritis?" The drunk smiled and said, "I don't have it, Father. I was just reading here that the Pope does." So Homer and Darlene, a young farm couple, just couldn't get enough of each other after they got married. Every morning before Homer headed out to the fields, they made love. When Homer came back from the fields, they made love again. And, of course, they had their nightly routine as well. But there was one problem, their midday rendezvous. Homer had to spend half an hour traveling home and another half hour going back to the fields. This was eating into his work time, and he was falling behind on his chores. Desperate for a solution, Homer went to see the town doctor. "Homer," said the doctor, "here's what you do. Take your rifle out to the field with you. When you're in the mood, just fire a shot into the air. That'll be Darlene's signal to come out to you, so you won't lose any work time." Homer thought it was a great idea and tried it out. For a while, everything went perfectly. Whenever he was in the mood, he fired a shot and Darlene would come running. They'd find a secluded spot, have their fun, and then she'd head back home. But after a few weeks, Homer went back to the doctor. "Doc," Homer said, "your idea worked like a charm, but now I've got a problem." "What's the problem?" the doctor asked. Homer replied, "I ain't seen Darlene since hunting season started." So a feminist told me about the Dwayne Johnson rule. The rule, as she explained it, was that in order to determine if a particular comment was appropriate to say to a woman, first, ask yourself, would I be comfortable saying this to Dwayne Johnson? If not, don't say it. I thought this sounded like a good rule, so I told her, your chest is damn epic. So a husband and wife were snuggled up in bed, watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The husband, feeling a surge of romantic energy, turns to his wife and charmingly suggests, "How about a little fun?" The wife, engrossed in the show, absent-mindedly replies, "No, dear." Her husband, with a twinkle in his eye, responds, "Is that your final answer?" Without missing a beat, she nods and says, "Yes, it is." With a mischievous grin, the husband retorts, "Well then, I'd like to call a friend." So a young man goes to his girlfriend's father and says, "Sir, I'd like to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." The father looks him over and asks, "Really? How much do you earn?" The young man replies, "I make $2,000 a month." The father scoffs, $2,000? That's not even enough for toilet paper. Later, the young man meets up with his girlfriend. And she asks, "So, what did my dad say?" He sighs and says, "He told me you shit too much." So John is walking down the street when he bumps into Teddy, an old friend he hasn't seen in a while. Then exchange pleasantries, and then Teddy says he recently got a job as a lion tamer at the circus. John is surprised and blurts out, "How are you gonna be a lion tamer?" "As I recall, you used to be an accountant." Teddy says the circus people told him that the lions know the drill and the tamer is essentially in there as a prop. "Well, what if the lions start to get aggressive?" asks John. "They said to use the chair. You use the chair to push them back." John interrupts. "What if they're still aggressive?" "They gave the whip, and if I crack the whip, that should scare the lions and make them move off." John then asks, "But what if the whip doesn't work? What will you do then?" "Well then, they said to reach into my pants, pull out some shit and rub it in their eyes." "How can you be sure there's going to be shit in your pants?" Teddy sighs. "They said I'm gonna have to trust them on that one." So a woman and her young son were taking a cab in New York City on a rainy day. As they passed by, the boy noticed a group of women standing under the awnings. "Mommy," he asked, "what are all those ladies doing?" "They're waiting for their husbands to get off work," she replied. The cabbie turned around and said, "Lady, why don't you tell him the truth?" "Those women are hookers. They sleep with men for money." The little boy's eyes widened in surprise. "Is that true, Mommy?" His mother, glaring at the cabbie, nodded in affirmation. A few minutes later, the boy asked, "Mommy, what happens to the babies those ladies have?" The mother replied, "They mostly become cab drivers." So there once was a bear and a rabbit that hated each other. One day, they found a genie in a lamp who said he would grant them each 3 wishes. The bear went first and he said, "I wish to be the only male bear in this forest." And he got his wish. The rabbit said, "I want a motorcycle helmet." And he got his wish. The bear went up and said, "I wish to be the only male bear in the United States, and all the rest to be female." And he got his wish. The rabbit said, "I wish I had a motorcycle to go with that helmet." And he got his wish. The bear said, "I wish I was the only male bear in the world, and all the rest were females." And he got his wish. It was the rabbit's turn, and he said, "I wish that bear was gay," and rode away on his motorcycle. So, a fellow was walking along a country road when he came upon a farmer working in his field. The man called out to the farmer, "How long will it take me to get to the next town?" The farmer didn't answer. The guy waited a bit and then started walking again. After the man had gone about 100 yards, the farmer yelled out, "About 20 minutes. "Thank you. But why didn't you tell me that when I asked you?" The farmer smiled and said, "Didn't know how fast you could walk." So, a husband and wife are getting ready for bed. The wife is standing in front of a full-length mirror, taking a hard look at herself. "You know, dear," she says, "I look in the mirror and I see an old woman. My face is all wrinkled. My bosom is barely above my waist, and my bottom is hanging out a mile. I've got fat legs, and my arms are all flabby." She turns to her husband and says, "Tell me something positive to make me feel better about myself." He studies hard for a moment, thinking about it, and then says in a soft, thoughtful voice, "Well, there's nothing wrong with your eyesight." So, a police chief, a fire chief, and a city attorney were traveling together by car to a municipal management conference in a distant city. When their car broke down in a rural area, they sought shelter for the night at a nearby farmhouse. The farmer welcomed them, but warned, "I've only got 2 spare beds, so one of you will have to sleep in the barn with the animals." After a brief discussion, the police chief volunteered. Not long after heading to the barn, there was a knock on the farmhouse door. The police chief stood there, grumbling, "I can't sleep out there. There are pigs in the barn, and it reminds me of when people used to call us cops pigs." The fire chief, feeling bad, offered to switch places. But a short while later, another knock came at the door. The fire chief complained, "I can't do it either. The cows remind me of Mrs. O'Leary's cow that started the Chicago fire, and I keep having nightmares about burning to death." Frustrated, the city attorney finally said, "Fine, I'll sleep in the barn. Someone's got to get some rest." But a few minutes later, there was another knock at the door. When they opened it, there stood the cows and pigs. So during the Great Depression, there was a man who walked into a bar one day. He went up to the bartender and said, "Bartender, I'd like to buy the house a round of drinks." The bartender said, "That's fine, but we're in the middle of the Depression, so I'll need to see some money first." The guy pulled out a huge wad of bills and set them on the bar. The bartender can't believe what he's seeing. "Where'd you get all that money?" asked the bartender. "I'm a professional gambler," replied the man. The bartender said, "There's no such thing. I mean, your odds are 50-50 at best, right?" "Well, I only bet on sure things," said the guy. "Like what?" asked the bartender. "Well, for example, I'll bet you $50 that I can bite my right eye," he said. The bartender thought about it. "Okay," he said. So the guy pulled out his false right eye and bit it. "Aw, you screwed me," said the bartender, and paid the guy his $50. "I'll give you another chance. I'll bet you another $50 that I can bite my left eye," said the stranger. The bartender thought again and said, "Well, I know you're not blind. I mean, I watched you walk in here. I'll take that bet." So the guy pulled out his false teeth and bit his left eye. "Oh, you screwed me again," protested the bartender. "That's how I win so much money, bartender. I'll just take a bottle of your best scotch in lieu of the $50, said the man. With that, the guy went to the back room and spent the better part of the night playing cards with some of the locals. After many hours of drinking and card playing, he stumbled up to the bar. "Drunk as a skunk," he said. "Bartender, I'll give you one last chance. I'll bet you $500 that I can stand on this bar on one foot and piss into that whiskey bottle on that shelf behind you without spilling a drop." The bartender once again pondered the bet. The guy couldn't even stand up straight on 2 feet, much less one. "Okay, you're on," he said. The guy climbed up on the bar, stood on one leg, and began pissing all over the place. He hit the bar, the bartender, himself, but not a drop made it into the whiskey bottle. The bartender was ecstatic. Laughing, the bartender said, "Hey, pal, you owe me $500. The guy climbed down off the bar and said, "That's okay. I just bet each of the guys in the card room $1,000 each that I could piss all over you and the bar and still make you laugh." So a mother and her teen daughter arrive at the doctor's office. The doctor says, "Okay, what seems to be the problem?" The mother replied, "It's my daughter, Susie. She keeps getting these cravings. She's putting on weight and is sick most mornings." The doctor gives Susie a good examination and then turns to the mother and says, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, But Susie is pregnant. About 3 months would be my guess. The mother says, pregnant. She can't be. She has never ever been left alone with a man. Have you, Susie? Susie says, no, Mom. I've never even kissed a man. The doctor walks over to the window and just stares out of it. A few moments later, the mother says, is there something wrong out there, doctor? The doctor replies, no, not really. It's just that the last time something like this happened, a star appeared in the east and 3 wise men came over the hill. I'll be darned if I'm going to miss it this time. So, the other day I came home from work, and my wife was sitting on the couch with my mistress. Stunned, I asked, what's going on here? My wife replied, you tell me. I told her, it looks like you're sitting here with some total stranger. My mistress stood up and said, stranger? We've been sleeping together for months. I turned to my wife and asked, my God, is this true? So a blonde pushes her BMW into a gas station. She tells the mechanic it died. After he works on it for a few minutes, it is idling smoothly. She says, what's the story? He replies, just crap in the carburetor. She asks, how often do I have to do that?